Welcome everybody to our seventh kitchen table conversations. For those of you who are joining us live or watching us later on, thank you for joining these conversations and continuing the conversations in your community or in your homes or with the people in your lives, and particularly the men and masculine folks, individuals that you're in relationship with, right? Because this is sort of the platform that we want to be giving and building for all of you to continue these conversations that we've started here, or you can add more to it as well too. And so again, my name is Pheng Thao, and using he, him, his pronouns, and sort of doing most of the introductions here, but I'll also have my colleagues and friends and brothers and siblings here also introduce themselves as well too before I go on further.
Hey, I'm Roderic Southall, he, him. I'm great and glad to be here. I am great, own it, I guess, and I am glad to be here.
You are great. Hello, everybody. My name is Ed, and I use he and him pronouns here in Duluth, Minnesota, where it is cloudy, but I'm doing my best to feel bright. So I'm happy to be with you all too.
Hello, everyone. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Reporting from Eagan, Minnesota. Super excited and happy to be with all of you guys. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Sean Hayes and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm also up north in Duluth, and I did see some sun pop through in my backyard for a second or two, but happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you, thank you. Just a couple of things that we want to share that are happening. If you don't already know, today is Give to the Max Day to support a lot of great causes, a lot of great nonprofits that are happening here in the state of Minnesota. And we know that men and masculine folks spend a lot of their money not inside the home, but outside and elsewhere. So this would be a really great opportunity for yourself to really give to good causes. Obviously, some of those organizations that do this work as well too, such as Men as Peacemakers, Casa de Esperanza, the Women's Foundation, who also supporting us as well too in this. And there's many more other organizations who are doing great work out there. So definitely go to Give to the Max. You can Google it, and then you can find the causes, the organizations, and donate today. It's always a great way for men and masculine folks to also show up, not fully just in your own bodies, but also by providing resources to organizations and to be engaged in community in that kind of a way. So it's really important that we show up in that way as well too. I also want to make sure we acknowledge Austin again for his participation in this in very invisible ways by doing some of the logistical background for us. So thank you, Austin, for doing that and continuing to help us and support us in that way. And again, one of these days, obviously having you join us in the conversation as well too. We thought that maybe perhaps really in light of tomorrow being Trans Remembrance Day, not only for trans folks, but other LGBTQ folks, especially the gender non-binary folks and gender non-conforming folks as well too, to really in this conversation really have that kind of a conversation about as those of us who are cisgender and straight men really have the conversation about how do we explore and move in our own transphobia places, right? The places inside of ourselves or our own thinking or emotions and how we navigate the world with transphobia being such a looming factor. And then also the fact that sometimes we don't actually pay attention to the lives of trans and gender non-conforming folks and gender who are living their lives in community. That's what I was trying to say. Because we've been all socialized to just see people as either male or female only. and move in that way and then are in relationship in that way only. So I think it's an important conversation to do that. And in connection with that, obviously, we know that next week, for those who celebrate Thanksgiving or for those who celebrate other holidays, it's time of the year where people are coming together. Families are at least having some time to spend a meal together, or opportunities to be able to connect up and meet up. We know that the holidays are around the corner, and obviously with COVID, and particularly here in Minnesota with the governor's new order of just staying home and making sure you're connecting with your loved ones at home and not having many or other households come and join you. How are we as male identified folks, masculine folks, and men folks doing and navigating in that celebration, right? So it's also about remembering trans and gender non-conforming folks and those lives that have been lost due to violence, but it's also about honoring and loving those lives at the same time, in conjunction to us honoring and celebrating those who we're in connection with during these times as well too. So that would be the conversation that we would want to have today. And obviously for those of you who are joining us virtually and live, chat with us, engage with us as much as we engage with you, and the questions that we raise for each other are definitely questions we're raising for you to think about as well too, because this is what and how we're building this space. So I guess we could start anywhere, in any place, and I know that we'll intersect at some point in the conversation, because we know that people don't live siloed lives, but are very intersectional beings, you know, who have a lot. So in light of the tomorrow, I think we could probably maybe share events that are happening that people can participate in, if we know of events that are happening, taking place.
Yeah, and just you know, feeling grateful that we can lift up tomorrow, Trans Day of Remembrance, together in our conversation today, because, you know, as someone who is trans identified, I identify as a trans man. You know, there's a lot of heaviness, there's a lot of sadness. This is a tough week for a lot of us. And so I was thinking I could just give just a little bit of background for those who are watching, who, and even those here who may not know. Trans Day of Remembrance actually dates back to the late 90s, when a woman was killed in Boston. And that was sort of the first vigil and community gathering that we know of to honor those who have been killed and murdered. And the day really lifts up those around the world. So it is an international holiday. So there are a couple of different sources out there, people doing the work of collecting, gathering information and researching these individuals, these community members who have been murdered. And that is not an easy task. As we know here in this country, oftentimes transgender and non-binary people are often misidentified in the news in these cases. They're often, you know, dead named and identified in that way. So we know that the numbers are probably a lot higher than what we see on these lists. But as of today, as far as I'm aware, globally, there have been over 420 people murdered, specifically only because they're transgender, because they identify outside of the binary. And one thing that I always like to point out with those numbers is that the vast majority of these folks, these community members, my siblings, are trans folks of color. And especially transgender women of color, Black transgender women, and non-binary folks. You know, so it's one thing to come together and to memorialize these folks, and also, you know, it gives us an opportunity to look deeper at, like, what what kind of community work are we doing? Are we trying to be intersectional, you know, like Pheng mentioned, those silos, like, are we actually doing the work to build relationships with folks of color and all of that? So just a little background about the day. It's celebrated every year on November 20th. And as far as events, myself and a lot of community members in Duluth came together to plan. We're going to be hosting a virtual ceremony or vigil tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And that will be broadcasting live on Facebook. That's 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that will be through our Trans Plus Facebook page. So if you search Trans Plus, it should pop right up. And we will be honoring those folks then.
Thank you for that, Sean, for the background information and for the opportunities to connect and engage as well. One of the things that I think about on times like this is how easy it is for those of us who don't have an identity as transgender or non-binary, or you know, outside of the socially accepted binaries of gender, how easy it is for us to ignore the effect that transphobia and other forms of oppression related to gender, like the harm that it causes, and the way that the fabric of the community is actually torn when any of these people across the world are taken from community too soon, simply because of gender identity. This is the case like across the board. From my perspective, I have, you know, identities that tend to be privileged and are dominant and identified as dominant in society. And it's so easy for me to go numb to, or turn my back away from, or choose not to fully be in the reality of of everything, from the fear to the reality of the loss and death that has happened to folks in the community who are experience violence, or are killed, or experience harm because of their identity. And I just think that that's one of the things that we lose collectively when we sign on to, or sort of like even when we're just passively going along with the way that society and our communities are set up to privilege and benefit folks who fit into the gender binary, versus, and I say versus purposefully, like versus people who are non-binary or transgender. We lose some of our capacity, and we turn away from some of our capacity to fully feel, and to fully accept, and to fully be in responsibility to those siblings that we have in community. And I'm thankful for Pheng and Sean bringing this forward as an opportunity to take a moment and actually feel and be with that, because the other part that I would say about it is it's actually a specific reflection of our own. We also lose our own ability to be completely open to who we are and what gender means to us, because there is no such thing as just like one type of man and one type of woman, and you fit into that box or you fit into this box. Everybody experiences gender and maybe we could talk a little bit about what gender actually is, but everybody experiences gender in a whole spectrum of ways. It's expressed in a whole spectrum of ways. There's things about me that are like, in my entire being, there's parts of me that are more masculine identified and more feminine identified. And part of this ability to turn our backs on the harm that happens to other people is also an inability, or a numbness, or a fear of actually acknowledging within ourselves like the full complexity of who we are and how we are actually directly connected and so much like the folks that we are in community with. So so weeks like this are both heavy with the reality of what they mean, and they are such huge gifts of possibility to understand ourselves and our responsibility to one another in a deeper way.
Well, thank you, Ed. I think it's hard to follow up that. I second what all you guys said. For me, as a Latino, growing up in the Latino community, my perspective, what I saw, it was a lot of homophobia, transphobia, and like Ed said, we ignore it just because it didn't affect us directly, or just because maybe we didn't know what to say. But as you guys mentioned, this is a time to remember all those that we have lost through that hate, and have an opportunity to have conversations to our circles, to our family, of the importance of of taking care of each other, of self-care. And if we want to live in a world of equity, what are steps we need to do in order to be more efficient, how we can show more love, more compassion, and realize that, like you guys mentioned, we don't need to be guided by the genders. We're better than that. What we need to do, this is the opportunity to learn more. That I'm a person that I'm still learning about it, but don't be afraid to ask questions, but do it with love, with compassion. Be aware of maybe some of our behaviors, how damaging could be, and how being silent, how much harm we can cause. Because me growing up, through jokes, through conversation, I'm totally sure I made a lot of those mistakes and I caused harm without thinking more in deep. So this is a time to reflect about that, to try to avoid continue causing that harm, and to make other people accountable when we see they're doing that. So the power is on us, and to make a difference, to support, organizations like Trans Plus, and there's a lot of other good organizations doing the work out there. Let's support them. Let's have these conversations, because this is a time right now to start creating change, a change that is going to reflect in the future, and a way to avoid losing that many lives through through the hate that we could cause sometimes without realizing it.
And I just wanted to lift up too that, I think a lot of what I hear as a trans person with, I know lots of loving, supportive, kind people who care about me, who see me, who, see me for more than just that, right? We're more than just our gender. But I also I hear from a lot of folks who, they have very good intentions. They want to understand, they want to learn, they want to, be allies. That word is, out there, and people easily will say, oh yeah, I'm an ally. But I think just lifting up, for many of the trans and gender nonconforming people I know, we're not out here trying to hold cisgender people to like a perfection standard of you should obviously know all of these things about me and how I identify, and there is a learning curve. We're not all taught these things. I mean, for any LGBTQ plus person out there, I mean, we know we're not taught about how to live into those identities, and so it's all a process of learning. And when we come with an openness and that, that intention of, I want to know, I want to do better, like most trans folks are happy to have conversations about that with those kinds of folks who are, earnestly seeking to do better, and looking at their own lives and seeing, I think, as Ed mentioned, like where are these things in my life where I cling to the gender binary, or I have this belief that only men do these things and only women do these things. I think, Ed, when you were sharing, it is like gender is so expansive. It's so beautiful. It feels limitless. But when we're, brought up in a society where there's literally only two options, it's really hard to break out of that mold.
Yeah, I think about, in conjunction to that, I was just thinking about like my own story of like the environment around me, and the way in which I was taught was and dressed and taught how to express myself, and when I was expressing myself in ways that weren't conforming to the idea of what the traditional idea of what it means to be masculine, it was like people would look at you strange, or mom and dad would be like, you shouldn't do that, right? So there's like this policing that actually happens, and in recognition of that policing, to then be a man and to be masculine, it growing up and being in spaces, I think with people who identify as gender non-binary and gender non-conforming and trans, then it's taught me to really, like, I don't know how to then relate, right? That's what it is. And I think that that's important to recognize, that it's like, I don't know. And so it drives the fear, it drives some doubts. It's like, how am I supposed to relate to this person? And I think that that's real. And it's in a way also important for me then to look internally in myself at some point, then to be able to say, oh, I didn't get the chance to explore, right? That I didn't get that chance to explore as well too. I didn't get the impact of being raised, in that rigidity of a male and female dynamic, because I didn't get the chance to explore fully. So, and I only got and knew how then to relate to women identified folks only. But like beyond that, I didn't know how, because I wasn't socialized that way or given that opportunity to be able to say, oh, you're actually interacting and being with other quote unquote human beings. And I don't want to put that as a blinder on, right? But your interaction with other beings on this earth or in community or other individuals and other people is really important, regardless of their gender, right? And so I was just reflecting back on and it's not in any way to dismiss my own privileges as a cisgender straight man, but I know that at some point it clicked in me where it was like, oh crap. It wasn't like, why am I thinking like I have to relate to this person? Like, I don't know, like something had to click in me to be like, moving beyond my own transphobia of like, oh, I should just relate to this person as I would relate to anybody, any other man or any other woman, right? That they aren't any different than that. And that this person in front of me isn't something else that I don't know how to be in relationship with. I am a person, they're a person, and we can connect and we can share. And just because they express themselves in a different way, just because they are dressing themselves in a different way, just because they look different, doesn't mean that I shouldn't be like not interacting with them or not treating them without respect or without dignity or without pride or all of those things, right? It's just, so it's like all of those combinations that are happening. And I think that that's the piece that I really want to highlight is like, how do we overcome our own transphobia on a daily basis, right? Not just in the moment, or not just like when we start our learning or relearning or unlearning part to be a good ally, quote unquote, in the community to trans and gender non-binary folks. But really, like, how do you do that on a daily basis, right? How do you undo those things? And even with, I think about like me raising my own two kids and having and giving them the ability to be able to actually fully explore who they are, right? And that just because they come out and the doctors are like, they're boys, doesn't mean that that's what they're identifying as, and allowing for room and spaciousness for them. And then so I think I'm learning in those ways to be able to create some spaciousness for myself even, and to really think about like gender in a different way, and to overcome my own transphobia places like on a daily basis. And it's not other people saying, pointing it out to me, but internally my own accountability is about making sure that I'm overcoming those things, or I'm dismantling that myself, the transphobia piece myself, the homophobia piece myself, and I'm not waiting for others, because my wait on other folks to tell me I know it's going to cause the life of a trans person or a gender non-conforming person to actually lose their life. My hesitation is going to cause that. And then obviously my silence is going to also cause that as well too. So it's in recognition of that that I share in light of what you are sharing as well too.
Pheng, I think that the challenge, which I heard it thrown down as a challenge, in terms of active mindfulness continuously, is what I heard so clearly. And I was thinking of a couple of things. One, I was thinking of sort of the truth is always in the middle. And so when I think of these conversations about sort of various poles around gender thinking, if you will, I do think, as you said earlier, the truth, right? Your truth, everyone's truth, is somewhere in the middle. And it's unfortunate that we're asked to look one way or the other constantly. I think about the sometimes for sort of Black folks who say the redemption of our people, right, is going back to our traditions, right, our African traditions, and I'm reminded of stories of parents who don't put on their children a name, and they watch them for a number of years before they say, okay, this is the name that's come out of you. It reminds me also that sometimes we run back to, for salvation, these cultural pieces that stop cold at sort of where gender splits. And so while they're running back to say, oh, wasn't this the time when we were just the best of Black people? And you're like, well, actually, if you take a few steps further, that's the authenticity about that journey was not so binary, right? And so I just kind of think it's funny how communities run towards a salvation and they don't finish the journey, if you will. But back to the notion about sort of being sort of ever present, if you will, in being activated and recognizing my short-sightedness. I mean, I'm thinking about, like, how do I do that? How do I incorporate, right, in my daily journey, my lazy, how do I unincorporate my laziness around who I am and who I identify other people as? And that's what I'd like you guys to help me figure out. What points in my days what can I do? What kind of things can I posit in my day that would help me do that and make it a habitual thing that I do? I started by thinking, oh, because I had some folks who said, one, we don't mind you asking all these questions, but do it in the age of Google, do just a little bit, right, of research, right? Don't come to me empty, expecting me to fill you up, right? Come to me with having done some research, having figured out sort of where you stand, right? And what you don't know, what you don't understand before you ask me to kind of feed you all this stuff. So part of me said, okay, well, perhaps I should do some research some looking, right? Some every day to sort of set my frame. But I'd love other suggestions.
I think, gosh, this is a good question. I mean, even for me, because I've been thinking about as the conversation is going, yeah, I'm transgender, and I identify in a very binary way, a very masculine. If we're thinking about a spectrum, if gender is a spectrum, I'm very clearly on one side of that, and that's who I am. And it also means that I'm causing some of this harm to happen, and I need to continue doing my work to build my understanding of what it's like to be completely off of that spectrum when we think about non-binary, gender non-conforming people, agender, polygender. Like there's so many different ways to identify, and so it's like I definitely have my own work cut out as well. And one thing that came to mind, Roderic, as you were kind of saying, like, what are some of these daily things that will like remind me to look at that? And it brought me back to like the beginning of this year and right around the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests. And it was a moment where I was looking at my news feed. I was looking at the things that I was consuming, like TV shows and just whatever it is, right? And it was so white, and it was so polarized in that way, where it's like, okay, I had to go and look for who are these people that I should be following? Who are these folks of color, Indigenous, Black folks that I need to be seeing and hearing and watching? And so I think that, I remember early in my transition, that was one of the things that I did right away. It was like, where are all the trans people? And I want to follow them, and I want to see what they're talking about and hear, what the work is like where they are. And one thing that very recently came out is a documentary called Disclosure, which I believe is available on Netflix, one of those services. And it is literally all about representation of transgender people in Hollywood and TV shows and movies and all of that. Wow, that was powerful. Like when I went and watched that, it was like, so many movies, so many things came back, and it was like, whoa, there's some really yucky stuff out there, to be aware of and to notice those things and then to call them out when you see them, right? Like, I mean, there was an example of like the movie Ace Ventura, and he, dresses in a feminine way at some point in the show. And it's, that's not a good portrayal of trans people. Anytime cis people are portraying us, that story is going to be super biased. But yeah, just generally, like, what are the things that we're reading? Do we see trans people on our news feeds or our Instagram feeds? And where can we sort of like inject more of those different identities to our lives?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the active mindfulness and intention that you were naming, Roderick, was really important in terms of like being quote unquote proactive and being thoughtful about like the way in which I engage. And it could just be making sure that I always use my pronouns. And it's really important that I know a lot of trans folks and gender non-binary folks really fight hard for pronouns and to be identified. And so I recognize that, and being able to make sure that I'm constantly saying that and constantly being able to identify myself in those ways through pronouns, as one example. And then I think like not only having Sean as my gateway to the trans community only, right? Like the one friend, like the one Black friend, Broderick, you're the gateway to the Black African American community. And it's like, I think that we need to get away from those things. And I think Sean names it correctly, is how do you immerse yourself into the community in a way where you're not a burden to them, but in a way in which you're like, I want to be in community, I want to be listening, and I want to be building relationships. I want to be exploring my own places of myself as well, and it's my own thing. And I'm here to learn, but I've done my education. I'm continuing to learn at the moment simultaneously, and it's that part, right? Because we are so bombarded by like really quote unquote gendered male and female stuff on a daily basis. And it's hard to get out of that unless you take the time, like you're asking, Roderic, to really say, okay, I need to find spaces and places and people and voices and stories that I don't typically hear, right? And I want to, like Sean said, find stories and spaces and places where they allow for me and my talking about me and first person as a cisgender straight person to be in, right? That they welcome myself in it. And obviously there are spaces where I know I'm not welcomed. And that's okay. I'm not going to be like, oh my God, there they go again, having their own space. And this is why, you know, and I see those things. And that's coming from a very privileged place when we say things like that, you know, as those of us who identified as male and straight, or men and straight and cisgender. And so I do that, and I don't want to also be a burden on the folks as well too. Um, and I think the most important thing for me is the learning, that I'm doing my own learning constantly and continuously, right? As I build relationships and as I connect in community with folks, right? And not having, again, my one friend, then that helps me not be transphobic, you know. Having one friend doesn't give me credit. I already know that. Having 10 friends who are trans isn't going to give me any credit. Gosh, if that were true, I would name Ed and all of the white men that I knew to give me credit to be moving in this world, not as a man of color, but to get the privileges that they would get, as Ed was naming earlier, you know. But I don't get that. I don't get that kind of a credit if I name Ed in them.
Yeah, what a good question to point in our direction, Roderic, and I would agree with what everybody else said. And I was just thinking, I really have no perfection around this, have lots to learn, and there are many ways of actually thinking about and understanding things too. One of the things that I think about though is that, like, gender to me is a beautiful thing. It just is a beautiful thing. So it is like a way that humans in different ways at different places have come up with understanding who we are in a physical, emotional, and spiritual way. And then, like, in our society anyway, we've turned it into a very strict binary that is used to determine what people are supposed to do, how they're supposed to do it, what roles they play, how leveraging and exploitation occurs. Like, there's all sorts of things that those roles have come into being around. So as a cisgender straight man, like, I think on a moment-to-moment basis, like, to the best of my ability, one thing is like, there is a responsibility to actually find my joy and my peace and my connection to who I actually am. And we're actually following the leadership of trans activists when we do that, because you think about the courage and the like space and the way that things have had to be held in order to actually create the space that is emerging for trans community now across the country and across the world. So there's a piece in that, and then there's the part where because I'm a cisgendered straight man, and because the ways that I am, like, are so easily accepted, like, on a moment-to-moment basis, I do not succeed at doing this, but can I have an awareness, and am I making note of the ways that I actually fall into the patterns of the accepted way of expressing my gender and being my gender, just because it's easy and just because it will be accepted and just because it fits into those patterns, rather than because it's something that actually feels in balance and at peace for me. And perhaps even more importantly, like, are there times when I do make those decisions? There are times, there are definitely times. Like, can I feel it when I choose to go with the status quo? I choose to talk about things. I don't use my pronouns. I do a bunch of other things that because because I can actually, it's like a leveraging at the expense of, like, and I think that, like, it's a question, but it's also a challenge. It's like, the more that we can feel when we're actually out of alignment with others around us, the better. And that has a lot to do, though, with actually being okay with who we are in the spectrum of what is possible there too. So, but I think that a good starting point for me has been and will continue to be, in a lot of imperfection, this recognition that, like, that I actually have learned from a very young age to posture myself based on a cisgender male identity as a man, and that I'm doing that in ways that can be harmful, like, to people in a variety of different ways. Transgender and non-conforming, it's been harmful to women, cisgendered women. It actually doesn't feel so great to me oftentimes. And am I willing to, like, take a look at that way that gender has become a path that I guide myself on, when I get up and I look at myself in the mirror every morning, and I move through the world deciding how to present myself and introduce myself, and speak into the various roles that I have in the community and the way that I interact with other people. Like, how is the way that I present my gender showing up each and every moment?
I think that it is that thank you for that acknowledging again. I think we've heard it before about sort of the courage that it takes. Because I don't know that we individually nor societally sort of make that assumption about trans folks, right? That there is this this courage, right? That seems can be tagged to most folks who are trying to be sort of live in their authentic space.
Yeah, what I could say that haven't been said, that, we need to open more spaces to have this type of conversation. I think it comes with some level of responsibility, but at the same time, we have seen, now some trans folks, for example, in Minnesota, Andrea Jenkins is part of the city council, I think, Minneapolis City Council. So it's opened opportunities for, trans folk to have those positions where they can step up, show up, how they truly are. And at the same time, those men that don't know, to have the opportunity to listen to them. I think to a certain point, we have the opportunity to do the work that we do to have this type of conversation. But what about the everyday folk that is out there who's not exposed to this, that he keep feeding himself with this transphobia that is in our movies, is in everywhere in the TV. So there should be some responsibility in the media and to create awareness about that, but we're missing those voices. We can, like you say, we cannot wait to being silent when every day there's people dying. We need to raise our voices. We need to see more, people out there taking those leadership roles and not being afraid to bring the topics, to this kitchen table conversations like the one we're having right now. Just because I know that it could be scary to be in a spot that you don't feel comfortable, but you need to still bring them up just to create that awareness in our communities and in our circles. But yeah, like Andrew Jenkins, there's a lot of people, voices out there. Let's support them. Let's listen to them with good intention, and yeah, let's make a difference.
Yeah, I would echo that in terms of the supporting the leadership and the visibility, and really raising the visibility of trans and gender non-conforming, gender non-binary folks, to ensure that their experiences are being shared and that they get to actually share that, right? Not just about, like, even in this space about honoring, but like making room, not just, and stepping aside as cisgender straight men, to step aside and to say, hey, you get to cultivate and you get to create this space. And your leadership is vitally important, right? And I think those kinds of not only acknowledgement, but like a deep commitment is really important to, I think, helping eliminate the conditions that are in the environment that allows for the violence to actually happen, that allows for the killings of trans and gender non-binary folks to actually happen, right? Because there's just too many lives, and I think those lives are not lifted up often, and we don't talk about it, and it's not seen, it's not heard. And part of it is, like, I think what we all shared here is through the media, they report it in a certain way, and so people don't get the full story, and people only get the main narrative that it's only women or it's only men that are being killed, and anybody in between that or outside of that doesn't exist, and it doesn't happen to those folks. But we know that the violence that actually happens is based in gender, based in how people are expressing themselves, right? When we're talking about gender-based violence, right? And it's built on the premise that you have to then behave and act as only men and women only, and you can't behave any differently. And it's really appropriate, and it's really okay, not even appropriate, but okay, or legally in some ways, okay for cisgender straight men to do the policing and to do the killing, right? And we've seen that over the years, and we've seen that in statutes too, reminded of the rule of the thumb, and that husbands can beat their wives as long as the thumb and the stick that they're using is as thick as a thumb, so those are just, I think that is inhibited in our culture and in our communities and in our institutions. And so how do we, like, sort of take those policies out or take away those things that then allow for the conditions to support the violence to happen, and obviously the individual choice of the person who's doing the harming is that of their own individual choice, right? So it's not taking away from that, and that they need to be responsible and accountable. But I think for those of us who are in participation in indirect or direct ways, we also need to be working to just, quote unquote, deconstruct the environment that allows for that violence to happen at the same time too, by doing, exactly what you were sharing there, Felix.
Yeah, and kind of throughout this conversation, it's made me think back to previous conversations we've had, here in this space about community accountability. And I was just thinking about the various levels of that, right? If we are, committed and dedicated to building safe, equitable, beloved community, where are we accountable in this? I think about those of us here, who do work around violence prevention. I mean, I just had someone just the other day reach out, actually through Instagram. I don't know I can't remember where they were from. They were not in Minnesota, but they found our Trans Plus page and they reached out and they were experiencing domestic violence and were looking for resources. And there just really aren't a lot of places. I mean, locally in Duluth, there are a couple of places that I feel safe as a trans person sending other trans people to who are experiencing violence. And then there are those places that we say, don't go there. We've heard bad stories. And so, as providers of these services, we've got to look at the way that we're doing that. Who are we letting into our shelters? What does our paperwork look like? Do we have he and she as the only gender pronouns? And then stepping it back out a little further to like the average person who's watching, who doesn't do this work, but maybe just popped on. There's so many different ways that we can, as we've said, make trans folks visible, just by adding pronouns to an email signature. That's a tiny little thing you do once and you never have to think about it again, but that makes a big impact because sometimes people will ask a question about what is this about? Why is that there? And then you have an opportunity to really step into that allyship and say, well, here's why I do this. Here's what I've learned. I don't know it all. And I'm going to pass it on to you. And then hopefully that ripple effect will continue out. And yeah, Felix, when you brought up Andrea Jenkins, and there's Philippe Cunningham also down in Minneapolis. And then just thinking about the elections recently, there were dozens of LGBTQ plus folks elected, including many transgender and one non-binary person who's like the first non-binary person ever to be elected that we know of. So there is progress coming, and I wanted to just touch briefly on, most of us call this Transgender Day of Remembrance, but there's also a huge push in our community to really look at the resilience in our community, to really like celebrate all of who we are, the ways that we are surviving in the world, as being trans people, as being gender nonconforming, and also like the art that we make and poetry and rock climbing. And like, there's just so many different things that, pieces of who we are. And so, I'm encouraged that I'm starting to see more stories out there about just, hey, this person is trans and here's all the other things they're doing. It's not just about being, trans. And, as we continue to like hold ourselves accountable and move forward in a good way, that's just going to continue. And I think about the trans youth, all these little babies coming up who are, they're growing up in a world that is more accepting. Whereas, when I came up, we didn't talk about this. I didn't even know that this was an option, and I've heard that same story from so many people my age and older. But there is progress happening. And I hear there's like a hashtag trans magic out there. There's a lot of magic happening. So I just want to lift that up as well.
I really appreciate that, Sean, and the guidance towards like, when we honor something like Trans Day of Remembrance, a way to remember and honor people is to be honoring, celebrating, and fully with the people that we're actually in community with, and to make that a practice that we're doing day after day after day. As well. And, for me, one of the things that that I can often fall short on is when I am, meeting new people, going into communities that that I'm not like explicitly a part of. Sometimes I show up and I try to be just so, and I'm, there, but I'm just sort of holding space, or not necessarily bringing all of who I am into my connection with folks. And I think that this is a great example of this is a week to renew the practice of being in relationship with trans and non-binary folks, and we're not in those relationships because for those of us who are not in that community because they are trans and non-binary folks, we're in that relationship because they are amazing beings that bring beauty and goodness and all sorts of stuff into the community. And so remembering to share things that give you joy, things that matter to you, pieces of you that that takes a little bit of trust to share, because that's what it's taking on the other end of the equation too. And as we build those relationships, like honoring, lifting up the leadership. And for me, I'm always remembering that people are in many ways, like there's all these ways that people are further along in the journey of like accepting and being and holding their space for who they are, and in appreciation of those lessons that are being taught in relationship too.
I think that's a good segue to our closing thoughts and points here about this conversation with regards to lifting up the voices and experiences of trans and gender non-binary, gender non-conforming folks, and remembering the lives that have been lost in order for this to actually to also happen at the same time, and the lives being lost at the hands of a society that only looks and thinks about gender in a very traditional male and female way only, and nothing beyond that. And so I think there's always much more discussions that we can always have, but I think that we encourage all of those who are participating and sharing and watching all of us as we all challenge and push ourselves, as Roderic said earlier, to continue not only the dialogue, but a practice and action, because that's what's going to stop the killing. That's what's going to lift up and elevate the voices and experiences of trans and gender and binary, non-conforming folks in community, right? So it is the action that we must do. And so I encourage all of us to really take action and to really be accountable and really be responsible for those of us, especially for those of us who identify as cisgender and straight men, you know. So that would be my closing part of it. And I give it to each one of my siblings here to also close as well to their closing thoughts, and have Sean close us out here.
For me, closing to the trans community, we can see you, we can hear you, we love you, we're here to support you the best way we can, and yeah, we can do much better together. You know, let's mobilize our community members, let's have these conversations, just because, you know, we're opening the opportunity in the future to live a world free of violence, of hate, and yeah, transphobia and homophobia. So thank you.
Wow, what a great conversation. You know, it makes me wonder, sort of, why am I non-binary, right? Right? You kind of go, well, what, you know, so self-examination. But I would just say that, you know, the other day we were talking with some people about sort of selective liberation versus collective liberation, right? And I think as we work to do better, we really need to be mindful of our innate ability and default to be selective about who's liberated and why, and on whose behalf we are willing to feel pain. And for me, I'd like to spend some time focusing on making sure that non-binary folks that community are folks that I'm willing to, and I can demonstrate a willingness to feel pain for, and include in that collective liberation that I seek.
Thank you all. It's always so beautiful to be with this family that gets closer and closer with every growing week. I guess I would just say in closing that this conversation has really, like, the feeling that I have inside of me now is a lot of gratitude for the way that trans and non-binary folks have been blazing a trail and creating conditions for the liberation of all. So as folks are hopefully signing on to these honoring ceremonies and such tomorrow, and those hundreds of names are being read off, like really holding to the beauty and the gift and the spirit and all the stuff that is represented, all the good that was brought through those folks who were killed specifically because of their gender identity, being transgender or non-binary. It means that they were taking a stand that was connected to the liberation of us all. So really holding and honoring that, and then also remembering that that's exactly what's going on with the people that are with us in community now. So thank you to our transgender and non-binary siblings, and Sean, as someone who's in this call with us, thank you for all the ways that we're in relationship and we get to learn on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you. Just feeling a lot of thankfulness, and yeah, mixed emotions, of course, but I'm very grateful for this community. I feel, very supported and held here, and there is a trust. So I'm grateful and appreciative to each of you. And I was sort of thinking as my, final thoughts, I want to, speak to my trans siblings and gender nonconforming siblings and say that, it's a hard couple of days here that we're going through. And I would just encourage each of us to take some time to actually sit in those hard feelings, to let ourselves feel that, and also not get stuck there. I'd encourage any of you who are struggling with depression or anything around this time. There are lots of us out here that you can reach out to. You could connect with me and many of those in our community who are here for you. So we want to just lift up the power and support that is in our community, the resilience, and yeah, just very grateful for this conversation. So thank you to each of you, and to all of you watching. Thank you for joining us. We really enjoy, obviously you can see we're enjoying these conversations together. We're enjoying seeing each of you, pop up on the screen and stopping by for parts of these. And we also want to take a moment to thank, again, our philanthropy partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and the Women's Foundation. And as a reminder, these conversations are happening live on Facebook every other Thursday. And the next conversation will take place on Thursday, December 3rd at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, live on our page here. If you haven't already, make sure you like our page, the Men and Masculine Folks Network, for updates and to stay connected with us. And if you'd like to check out any of our previous conversations, they're all available on our YouTube channel, which is linked in the description of this video. So thank you again. It's lovely to be with all of you, and we will look forward to our next conversation.